So I wanted to know about how people you've seen enter information into their encounter notes. So I know some people type, some people do a lot of dragon. I imagine that some people use the scribe, although I haven't heard too much about that. I know when Dr. McDonald had talked to me about it, he had problems, but I don't know what he ever went to. So I do a lot of typing. One because I can type, right? And there are a lot of people that can type, and that it's an unbelievable skill to have, and I can't believe that I needed it so much and continue to type. So I use TextExpander, which I wanted to talk about tonight. But first, I wanted to get an idea of how you see people enter the information into their encounter notes.
It is, I guess the best word to describe it is kind of a potpourri. It's a mixture of dragon with Dr. Mazer and Dr. Myers, Dr. McDonald. Dr. Blackwell uses direct fluence,
Yeah, it's another
which is a
speech to
three
text.
M. Mm-hmm. Yep,
Yeah.
got a lot of providers using templates. I worked with Dr. Ajlani yesterday with some order sets.
Now, when
So
they
she's
use
going to
templates,
experiment with that.
they're still going to have to enter some information, right? You're still going to have to
Right.
personalize things and add some stuff. And do those people typically do Dragon, or do they type as well, or what do they do?
Mostly typing.
Yeah. Okay. And how about places where, like, at some doctors' offices, many of the assistants do a lot of the data entry?
Yeah.
I
There's a lot of different
imagine
offices that enter the assessment and the treatment.
the assistants would enter the assessment and the treatment,
Correct.
and the doctor
I
might
do
enter
know.
the
Mhm.
the doctor might
Go
enter
ahead.
the subjective part, like what the patient tells you, and then the objective part, his findings, and then he might tell the assistant, "This is what we're going to do with the patient," and the assistant does the thing, gets the cam walker, gets the ankle brace, whatever, and does the documentation for that. Is that what you mean?
Yes, there are. I do know that Mount Airy and Greensboro are doing a lot of that, depending on the
Yeah,
provider. I think mostly for Dr. Shipley
yeah,
and Dr. Wilkes, they do a lot of that for them. I do know Dr. Collard, he prefers to do his own notes. They
and
work
then
up
when
to
the
the MA part. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then when the assistants are doing that, they're mostly using templates to put the documentation in, I would imagine, for the most part.
Correct.
Yeah. Some typing, some ways. Okay,
It's kind of a
cool.
mixture.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to log into ECW here because I have a couple things. Um, I've done my best with ECW in learning about it and training on it to make it as efficient for me and my office using the built-in tools that come with ECW. But I find for data entry, I've gotten just oodles of benefit from this tool, which I have showed to several people who also use it and have really found it beneficial. So I'm a bit of an evangelist for this. So take it for what you want, but I have found it not only a way to enter information into the note quickly, but also with a good amount of accuracy and in a way that makes my notes better. And really, it's you can consider it another way to template, and I'll show you what I mean by that. All right, so I'm going to open just a little scratch window here, just so I can show you some things that I've done.
Right.
Okay, so TextExpander is an application. It runs in the background. It's for Mac and Windows, and um, all of your what they call snippets are in the application window, and it syncs from computer to computer. So I have a computer in each treatment room. So all of my little shortcuts and snippets are all the same everywhere, all the time. I certainly use most of my snippets for work, but I do use them when I'm do renaming files or photos or things like that. So I use them in my non-work life as well, but I certainly use them a ton in my work life. And what they are taking a small amount of text and turning it into a large amount of text. So one of the simplest ones I'll use it for is I'll use it for my name, and you decide what you want your little shortcut to be, and mine is slash MJH for me, and it puts my name in. So I never have to type it. It always gets it right, except when I type the J after each time. And it's always right every single time. I never fat finger it like I do if I was typing just, by myself. I use it for my cell phone. I use it for my wife's cell phone. I use it for my email address. I use it for her email address, or did. Um, and things like that I just need to be able to type exactly correctly every time. For some reason, one of the physical therapy places that I use, I need to type their phone number in places. And so I have the telephone number for Ortho PT or their fax for them built into my TextExpander database. Um, so that TextExpander database is this, and you get a couple different folders. These are all my personal snippets that I've made most of, and that one with my phone number is this one, or excuse me, my name. And the abbreviation I type is here. This is what I've called it, which I think it put automatically in because this is the text that pops up when I type that abbreviation. So I type that abbreviation, and it puts my name in. Same thing for my cell phone and whatever. Um, so for simple text replacement, it is terrific. It also has a section that will have typos, common typos. Yeah. So I have one that is for the typos that I make all the time, where I type ankle AKEL or with an M instead, or I want to type PRN and I always forget the shift key for the last one, and it automatically fixes it for me. So I don't have to go back and do it when I make these typos all the time. So things like that make my notes much more readable and professional, and common typos get fixed automatically. Another ones that I use all the time is I use the date and I use the time, because when my best friend Shelly says, hey, this is not a Medicaid approved diagnosis, you need to go back in and change it, I can put my addendum in with the date and the time, and, note amended with Medicaid approved diagnosis. And I use the date and the time all the time. Um, where I find it also super helpful is with anatomy, right? So many times you're going to want to type first metatarsophalangeal joint, or a second or third. So I've gone through and I've just added first MPJ, second MPJ, third MPJ, etc. And all sorts of things like that. This I use all the time too. First met cuneiform joint, first met cuneiform joint. And that's how I remember them. Yeah, for some reason I found myself typing first Mac cuneiform joint and said, that's ridiculous. I'm not typing this anymore. And I made a little shortcut, and it's been great. So eventually I made them all. And luckily, the fourth met cuboid joint, it's also a C. So it makes it easy to remember, like fifth metatarsal base, or fifth metatarsal head, or third metatarsal head, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
have tons and tons of anatomy that I have in TextExpander for pieces of anatomy that I want to spell right every time, and look good, and not use some strange abbreviation that people don't understand or don't make sense or is spelled incorrectly. Anybody who does enough dictation, data entry, things like that, have their own phrases that are for them, that they use all the time, right? Certain things that are normal, or certain, pain here and a foot type description, things like that. So for example, one of the things I use this for is, I saved this for today, is I will get a pathology document, right? And here's my pathology document. And it says onychomycosis. Okay, so this is a positive fungal stain. So what I do is I sign it. Lets you know that I looked at it, and there's a million ways to do that. But then I add a little blurb here. And my blurb used to be where this ellipsis is, where we have those same kind of text replacement things, right? There's a short bit of text that makes a long bit of text over here. And up until today, because they're in alphabetical order, mine were right here. And mine have now moved to the second column. Totally reasonable. Everybody should use it. It's really handy. So what I've decided to do is, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just going to type positive fungal stain, which is the same thing that my little snippet in the ellipsis here said. And I'm just not going to bother anymore. And I'm going to keep that right here. So I saved that for today to show that TextExpander example.
I like that. It's very, very similar to the macros that ECW offers, but a lot better.
Yeah, so the macros, that's a great thing to use. But TextExpander is the way to go for sure. I think it's $40 a year, so I think it's probably reasonable for most people. So short
That
phrases I use all
extremely.
the time. You know where else I use a lot of little short phrases is an X-ray report, right? I want to say that that this foot is looks like it's a flat foot on radiographs, or I want to say there's a plantar calcaneal spur or a posterior calcaneal spur. You know what? There's an os perineum noted there, or an os tibial externum, or an os trigonum is there. So I have, just in my fingertips, I have dozens of these small shortcuts that, for things I see all the time. I'm sure this is probably my most used one. You know what? There's a synostosis of the middle and distal phalanges of the fifth toe. Those are so common, and you notice them, but who wants to go back and type all that? But with a little shortcut, I read this X-ray. I noted that, normal abnormality, and I put it in my note, and it makes your documentation much more thorough. Um, I use a snippet for when I debride nails. I think you could probably make a template that you use all the time that says something like, all mycotic nails are debrided. But I think, why don't I say a little bit more about what I did? And maybe I'll say nails 10. Or maybe I'll say, you know what, this patient only had 7 nails because of some amputation. So I want to put 7 because that's how many I did. And that's specific and that's individualized for the patient. And just over the span of time, I probably have all 10. And if I ever type slash nails and a number and nothing comes up, I'll say, yeah, man, I got to make that. And then I'll make it by cutting and pasting from the old one and fixing that. And by the time I go to the next patient, all of those snippets have synced and stayed in sync with each other all the time. So simple text replacement shortcuts, that in and of itself is probably 60% of my time savings and my shortcuts. So TextExpander has the ability to do a lot more. And I've been using TextExpander probably for 12 to 15 years. So I have a lot of experience under my belt. But if you do nothing else than make your own text replacement shortcuts, or say, hey, I'm using the macros in ECW, but I can make snippets that are easier and quicker, and using the ECW interface is not enjoyable. And I think this is far and away better, even if all you do is the exact same thing you do in ECW with macros. But luckily, TextExpander goes a lot farther. And one of the next things that is really a useful way to get a good bit of documentation in, as well as being able to individualize it, is instead of saying to your snippet, hey, when I type do this, you say, when I type this, ask me a question, and type the rest of this. And here's a great one. So, for example, um, I have a snippet for the email I send to Lisa once I have finished my um, editing of the video. And so I have a couple InStride TV snippets. I put them in their own folder, and I use this one all the time. This InStride live email, iLive for InStride live email. You name them whatever you want. And so if I go here, oops, and I type iLive uh, email, it'll say to me, all right, it's going to say this and all this, and put in my description, this week we talk about TextExpander. Okay. And it puts that in there, oops, um, with the information I put in. Yeah. My other
Yeah.
InStride snippet is, oh, the YouTube link, because people wanted the YouTube link. So InStride, what did I say it was? I can't remember. InStride TV. And it puts our YouTube link in there. I can't remember any of that. So I have it there all the time.
Right.
So being able to insert text is really helpful, right? And I'll show you some ways I've done that with podiatry specific stuff. The next thing, in addition to the ability to enter your own text, so here is what that snippet looks like. You don't have to worry about any of this. It's basically you type your abbreviation, a description or a label if you want, and what you want to appear right here. This description is what allows me to put in that information I put in about the particular video. So there are also um, pop-up menus, and those are instead of a box where you type stuff in, it is a list you can choose from. So let's say I have a patient coming in for their follow-up of their ingrown nail. Yeah. And, you know, one of two or three things will happen 99% of the time, right? They're fine. It looks a little red and they hurt. I'm going to put it on an antibiotic. Hey, this is all healed and you don't have to do anything anymore. So, and there are a few things, right? So that's, you know, if I get to that objective area in ECW and I need to describe how good their ingrown nail looks, you could do that with the template. Let's say you like to get your subjective verbally from the patient, so you do a bit of typing there, and then you're in your objective, and you know what? This is a follow-up ingrown nail, OCR, ankle cryptosis, my own abbreviation, make up your own, follow-up ingrown nail. Look, the first one, area of nail surgery is healing. Yep, that's the one I want. Looks good. Wait a minute. It didn't look so good. It was kind of red. I think we should maybe use an antibiotic because it maybe looks like it might be getting infected. You know what? They are completely healed, and they don't have to do anything. They're done. Or this one, which was a little different. The first one I did for the typical follow-up, little bit of rubor we noticed because with the chemical matrixectomies, usually they're still red for a little while. But this was not a permanent. This was a non-permanent. So this one's just a little different and doesn't have that information, which is great because it's much more specific to their exact problem. And it really was not any more significant effort than using what is going to be your typical one where you type that and hit enter and it's done. But not that much more difficult, and you get much more bang for the buck from it. So there are a lot of places you can put those, what they call pop-up windows, which are the snippet opens and you get a list of choices that you have made, right? This didn't come with TextExpander. I made a snippet follow up on a Go Cryptosis, and this is their little icon for a list. And when you type it, this is where you can add all the things in your list, as many things as you want. This is the one that is default. I have called it this. And then when I fire off that snippet, that's what pops up. So that's great. And all of those are super helpful, and they are relatively easy. You leave a space where you can type a couple words or a couple paragraphs, and you have a list of stuff that you can choose from to more finesse, more specifically describe what's going on. And they are really easy to make. If you've made macros in ECW, or if you've looked at this and said, I can pick a label, which is what does it say? And I can pick an abbreviation, which is what do I type? And I can tell you what to write, which is what comes after you type it. And we all do so many of those things that are exactly the same bits and pieces, patient to patient, time after time. When it gets interesting, we start getting snippets that are a little bit more, I'll say complicated. They're not complicated, they're just longer. And they may take some a pop-up window or a field or things like that. So the one I use, let's say 28 to 32 times a day is return to office. And it gives me this pop-up. You know what? I want you coming back in 3 weeks because we're going to assess the response and see how you're doing. But no, we're not going to do that. I have discharged you. So you're going to come back as needed. You know which one I type all the time? 10 to 12 weeks. So I used my slash 10 to 12 weeks snippet inside my return to the office. Return 10 to 12 weeks. And you know why? For periodic podiatric at-risk care, right? Because they got diabetes or poor circulation, and I don't need to return to assess anything. And that is my little blurb at the end of my note as to when and why I want them to come back. Another one I use all the time is I want to evaluate an ulcer. Look at this. This is not just a way to get all my information in succinctly. It is a way to make sure you enter all of the information you're supposed to have for, in this case, your ulcer. So, for example, it's a circular ulcer, sub 1, beneath the first MPJ, and it is 1.0 by 0.5 by 0.4, and there is a few millimeters of undermining, and the wound base is necrotic and it's full thickness, and there is some yellowish drainage, and there is moderate rubor. No ascending lymphangitis. And there is my blurb all about the ulcer that not only is legible and has the stuff you want to see, but it includes all the information that you're supposed to have. And you can bet your bottom dollar, I have the same thing for my debridements of my ulcers that have what I used and where it was and what the size was afterwards, and the full, how thick was the debridement, and all of the things that you're supposed to have in each of those areas of documentation that I find, instead of having maybe one of those exams and all of the different sections are different and you have to next or previous through them, if I put all of this in TextExpander, then I can use the tab key and I can tab through each of those things and enter what I want, where I want, and much, much quicker than I can navigate through ECW's interface. So making complicated snippets, which aren't complicated, they're just longer, and maybe they have more sections, and maybe you have space to document more things, but they're all still based on type this text, ask me what to put here, pick this from a list. They're all very much like that. put a checkbox here, right? Things like that. It's all simple. It's not complicated. You just start slowly. Use it for here I use this dozens of times every day. Left hallux, right hallux. Yeah. How many times do you do an ingrown nail on the right hallux medial border, or the uh, left hallux lateral border, right? Or both halluces, both borders, all the time, every day, for lots of things. So just using the text replacement stuff is super helpful. And then you can get as more into it as you want. But even with just the text stuff, you're going to save a ton of time. After I had quite a few snippets built up, Jim and I decided, well, we were going to share a bunch of snippets. So one of the first things we shared were DME things. I use some of these still. Dr. Lehrman has given us great templates, so I use those. But I have a bunch of DME that we share. For example, here you go, surgical shoe. That's a pretty low risk thing to document because they're cash anyway, right? Nobody's paying for those. You don't have to bill for them, but that's a good place to put a good, I'm a doctor that wants to document as much as I am supposed to area. So I will use that and dispense a surgical shoe and which foot and why and when you use it. And you know what? You want you to take it off and do this or that or the other. And I don't usually use that for surgical shoes, but I use parts of this snippet in other snippets. So I could do that, right? So this fit adjuster for the right for their stress fracture, second metatarsal. Second metatarsal. All the time, except for not for bathing and not for sleeping. And there's my blurb. And I have modified it over the years as I've gone to the meetings with Dr. Lehrman, who says, hey, put this in your orders for things, because that way they're not looking for another separate order because you're the provider and the supplier. So in the middle of the meeting, I said, oh, that's a good thing. And I went to my snippets and I added that little sentence. And by the time I got to work, it was all done. I didn't even have to think about it. I don't care. So Jim and I share a ton of different snippets. We share the DME snippets. I have a bunch of snippets under this one I called building blocks that I use in other snippets. I share a bunch with my wife. I made new ones when I went from CareCloud into ECW so I can document the routine foot care the way that ECW lets me do it. I use I use these. I don't use them so much as snippets, these fracture codes. Yeah. I will use them kind of like my portable brain. Like I'm like, I don't know what that fracture code is. But I know I put those fracture codes in TextExpander and I hate the search in ECW, and toe fracture sometimes comes up as the code and it doesn't seem to work right. So my toe fractures just gives me a list. Here are all the diagnoses that I might need for the toe fractures. So I'm in the search field in ECW. I say, oh no, I want this one. That's the fracture code that I'm looking for. And I okay, and it types the fracture code. And then it gives me ECW's like whatever code they have called it, named it, or whatever. And all of them are like this. So that's the code I want. I don't care what their description is, because when my claim goes electronically, they just look at the code and not the text anyway. I just need the code to be right. So I use these as a portable brain. I don't remember what the big toe fracture codes are, right? Because they're different. So I have that all ready to go right here. I've only had to put it in once. I don't have to use the search of ECW to look it up. And what else has been great is that I made most of these snippets back when I used ECW. And to be honest, I made quite a few of them when I used the EMR before that. So I am ready to be EMR agnostic. As long as there are places for me to type, I've always got my snippets with the information that I've created and honed and changed and modified as new rules and different things have come out. And maybe next time I go, Laramie will say, you need to tell them which hand you use the scalpel in for your debridement. And I'll add that snippet to my debridement. So when next time on Monday, when I go in and and throw that snippet, it's going to ask me, which hand I use, but I'll have already put in its left, and that's the default, and it's going to be there for me anyway. But I don't care what EMR I use tomorrow or next year, as long as there's a place for me to put the stuff I need to put, I can document on a napkin. It's no problem. So I have been super happy with TextExpander. I've used it for 15 years maybe, and it is the thing that lets me do as much as I try to do um, every day. So I'm going to leave with a couple tips, and then I'll be glad if there are any questions or anything else about it. So thank you for sticking around. I know we usually end a little early when there's nobody here, but I thought this might be helpful. So a couple tips. Avoid the temptation to make a whole bunch of snippets one afternoon. Yeah, maybe you can make 1 through 5 MPJs or things like that, but I have always found that making them as I realize I am typing the same thing again, or I need to document the same thing again in a certain way, that's when I will make a note to make a snippet, or if I have time, make it right then, or whatever. But try not to make a lot of them at once. It's so much easier to remember. Also, make a system for yourself. So many of my snippets are the things that I would say, but I take the first letter of every word or whatever sounds right to me, and I make a snippet from that. I also use, and I'm sorry if I don't know why, but I just started this way, that my snippets 90% of them start with a slash. I don't have a great reason for that. I just said, I really want to make sure I'm not accidentally typing the wrong thing in the wrong time. And I am never going to type slash anything and not want a snippet to come. So a lot of my snippets begin with a slash. But then as I was starting to put more things in snippets, most of my diagnoses start with a semicolon. Of my snippets that start with a slash, many times I use X, meaning that this is something I use on the X-ray. That's how I started. And I also use that for this means procedure, or X means to cut. So for example, my debridement is X debride, or my nail surgery is X nail. So make a system that helps you. I would have a posterior tibial tendonitis text replacement. So I just made a posterior tibial tendonitis, same snippet, but starts with a semicolon. And I have a bunch of my diagnoses that I had for posterior tibial tendonitis in a drop-down box. So use a system that helps. And then lastly, one of the nice things, like for those fracture codes that I don't remember, I just know because I looked them up before I wanted to talk about it, the toe fractures or the hallux fractures, I didn't remember what they were, but TextExpander says, hey, when you type a shortcut key, we'll give you a little search box. So mine is command and slash, and I searched for fracture. Oh, there's my hallux fracture codes. There's my lesser toe fracture codes that we saw. You know what? These are my fracture, closed fracture treatment without manipulation codes. And there they are. Calcaneus, talus, cuboid, metatarsal. Those are all the codes I'm going to use for those fractures. I don't remember them. Looking them up in ECW is a terrible thing. And look, here are some text replacement with the word fracture. I use slash FX, means fracture, slash SFX, stress fracture. And then, I use this, no signs of acute fracture dislocation in my X reports all the time. I use this, no cystic lesion, sign of stress fracture in the calcaneus. I use that for my heel x-rays a lot. So I use the inline search. So for me, it's command slash, and I get a search field in case I have forgotten, but I know I have something about fractures in here, and I can just type fracture, and then it reminds me. I can use the snippet abbreviation I made. They say you can use command 1, or maybe it's control 1 on a PC, and use that inline search to get to things that I don't use a lot, don't use enough, or I'm never going to use. They're just part of my portable brain, and I have all those fracture diagnoses in there, and I have a whole bunch of venous stasis ulcer diagnoses in there, because looking those up on ECW is also a misery. So TextExpander, I really recommend it. It is www.textexpander.com. TextExpander.com. I looked today to see if there was affiliate links so that you could all buy TextExpander and I would get $1. So, but they don't have one anymore, so you could just send me $1. So I'm glad, I appreciate you listening to me ramble on about TextExpander. I'm obviously a very big user of it and find it incredibly helpful.
Thank you. This was
Yes,
very informative.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope it is helpful. We'll put it up on YouTube in the near future. And if I can do anything, you have any questions, you let me know. And I thank you for being here.